There have been reports of a bizarre pay dispute in the urban area of Israel, and it comes amidst a series of surprising sayings by a travelling teacher called Jesus. Now, I've gone under deep cover to talk to a source about Jesus. Let's call him Matthew, but I can't show him on camera at this time. However, he is a follower of Jesus. But after talking with Matthew, I really can't understand why there's controversy. Israel's religious authorities are afraid of Jesus' teachings. Maybe that their efforts to regain home rule once again will be compromised after centuries of invaders ruling them with foreign rules and rulers. They allege that Jesus' teachings threaten to turn the kingdom of Israel on its head, as he describes an alternative kingdom, the kingdom of heaven. This Jesus seems to be the king of reversals, with confirmed reports that he took the time to bless children who even his own disciples tried to send away, that he taught that wealth makes it difficult to enter the kingdom of heaven, completely contrary to the common understanding that wealth is the result of blessing for obedience to God. That he even said that sacrifices made to follow him will be rewarded 100 times over in the kingdom of heaven. And Matthew actually confirmed the reports that Jesus keeps saying that the first will be last and the last will be first. But even more disturbingly for the authorities, this Jesus is said to be on the road to Jerusalem now, the capital of Israel. Matthew confirmed that Jesus said he'll be betrayed in Jerusalem and that their religious authorities will hand him over to the foreign rulers and they will mock him and flog him and crucify him. And then Jesus said he'll actually be raised back to life after 3 days. I have to say that this is the most upside down thing I've ever reported on. And I can see why even Jesus' followers struggle with his revolutionary teachings. There are also reports that he settled a dispute between them about who would be the greatest in this kingdom of heaven by saying, and I quote, "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Now, apparently, this Jesus calls himself the Son of Man quite often. And so, in the midst of all that teaching on reversals in the kingdom, I talked to Matthew about the pay dispute. And I have to say that this reversal teaching really does take us by surprise. This pay dispute is like nothing else I've ever reported on. Jesus actually challenges our ideas about equality and justice. He says there's a much better way to treat people. He'll often call that grace, which is about treating people much better than they deserve. In this pay dispute, Jesus calls it generosity. He says generosity is better than justice. Yet he doesn't say that equality or justice is bad, far from it. From what I can gather from talking to Matthew, Jesus says equality and justice are better than inequality and injustice, but generosity is really the gold standard of how to treat each other. So you can see why the religious authorities are concerned about Jesus and his reversals kind of teaching. They hold up justice as the gold standard, but they never talk about being generous. And no one that I've been able to talk to was willing to accuse them of being generous. They're genuinely concerned that if Jesus' teachings catch on, then life in Israel will be turned on its head. That the first type people like them will be last, and the last type people, the ones they rule over, will be first. And worse still, it seems they fear that their kingdom will be destroyed by their foreign rulers if things like generosity subvert justice. They're genuinely afraid of this poor travelling teacher, Jesus. So, I left Jerusalem and I've come to find some people who are involved in the pay dispute. I managed to speak to 3 of the people who are involved. None of them wanted to appear on camera, and so what we've done is substitute an artist's impression of everybody on screen for this report. But here's what they had to say about the so-called pay dispute. So first, it's one of the workers who were allegedly overpaid. Well, g'day viewers. Listen, a funny thing happened that day at the vineyard. We'd been waiting all day at the market for someone to hire us. I'm pretty used to that. You know, those bosses, they're pretty hard to please. They want you to work all day in the heat for like 10 hours without many breaks. I don't really like that. So some of them don't hire me anymore. I mean, you can't take it too seriously, right? Anyway, this boss turns up at like 5 in the arvo. Must be desperate for workers to hire us at 5 o'clock, I'd say. He's been hiring guys right through the day. He says he'll pay us whatever is right, whatever that means. We're certainly not used to that. But we know this guy. He's a pretty good bloke to work for, so we go and do an hour's work. Nothing to lose, really. It's a piece of cake, an hour in the vineyard in the coolest part of the day. Nothing too serious. So anyway, at quitting time, we go see the foreman to get paid, and we get paid first. Not used to that either. And amazingly, he pays us a full denarii. That's the going rate for a full day's work. But we only worked about an hour. I think that's what he meant by whatever is right. Nice surprise, eh? So we walk out there with a denarii, barely raised a sweat. And the guys who worked all day are all lined up. They take it all too seriously for my liking. Anyway, we showed them what we got paid for 1 hour, and they're amazed too. But then I heard later that they're all bent out of shape, upset because the boss only paid them a denarii too. Like I said, that's the going rate for a full day's work. I'm pretty sure they would have agreed on that with the boss beforehand. I mean, they're pretty serious workers, those guys. They make sure their pay is all clear before they go to the vineyard. Now, look, it's hard to say if we should have taken the denarii for 1 hour's work. I mean, the usual thing would be to get hardly anything for that hour, certainly not enough to live on. But I can tell you this, the boss's generosity really helped us. Now, as you can see, this is a bizarre pay dispute. Let's hear from another worker who worked all day that same day. Well, look, I can tell you this much. I've never seen anything like it. We're working all day, right through the heat. That's what we agreed in the morning. And right through the day, the boss keeps bringing more workers. And then these other jokers turn up at like 5 in the afternoon, an hour from quitting time. They turn up last, but then they get paid first. How's that work? And then they get paid a denarii, the same as us too. They showed us. That's the going rate for a full day's labour. Well, how's that work? We worked hard all day, like we always do, right through the heat. These guys turn up right at the end and do hardly anything in the coolest part of the day, and then get paid the same as us by the foreman. When we saw how much they got paid, we were expecting to get a bit more, maybe a lot more. But no, we get paid the same as them. All that extra work for no reward. How's that work? So you can see that not everybody's happy with this generosity way of treating people. Some of them think that it's inequality and injustice. Maybe it is, or maybe not. Let's hear from the boss who told the foreman what to pay everyone. So, I guess by now you've heard about the scandal. So I hired lots of day workers to work in my vineyard that day. There was lots to do, so I kept going down the market, hiring more blokes throughout the day. Even at the last minute, I got more guys at about 5 in the arvo. Anyway, the foreman pays the boys at quitting time, and I told him to pay them all a denarii. That's the going rate for a day labourer. They've all got families to feed. Generous for some of them, I know, especially those last guys I hired. A lot of those blokes aren't much good at any time of the day, really. You know, those 5 o'clock blokes. But then the guys I hired first thing, well, they're not happy. They reckon they should get paid more than the overpaid guys I hired last. They reckon it's not equal, it's not fair. Well, let's see. I hire them first and we agree on a denarii for a full day's work, and that's the going rate, no surprises there. They work a full day, I pay them a denarii, all good. But apparently that's not their gripe with me. They're upset because I overpaid the 5 o'clock guys but didn't overpay them. Well, I'd have to agree with them and say that's true, but it's also true that I can overpay people if I want to. And I can pay people what we agree if I want to. Now, what they call inequality and injustice, I call generosity. Why can't I overpay the 5 o'clock guys if I want to? That's generosity. It'd be injustice if I underpaid someone, but I've never underpaid anyone that day or any other day. I wonder if this was really about jealousy. Were they just jealous because I overpaid the last workers but not them, the first workers? And so I pointed that out to them. I asked them to reconsider their accusation of injustice. They wanted justice, which I gave them. We agreed on a denarius, and that's what I paid them. It's my choice to overpay people, not their choice. But that's how it is when you're the boss. The workers don't like the fact that you can make choices about what you do with your own money. They don't have that level of choice like we do, and I get that. But that doesn't give them the right to accuse me of injustice when I'm really just being generous to someone else. Go figure. So it seems pretty clear that this Jesus really is turning things upside down. In his kingdom of heaven, generosity is far better than justice and miles better than injustice. But people who don't understand that see it as injustice. They want to know why everyone doesn't get overpaid equally. But it seems to me, a lowly reporter, that this story is making a sound point, that generosity really is better than justice. Or in his kingdom of heaven terminology, grace is better than eternal punishment. Jesus keeps teaching that God treats us far better than we deserve, that we all deserve justice for our sin, for all the things we think, say and do, the things that ignore him as our king. And that's a real concern for all of us, I believe, because in my years of reporting, I've never met anyone who doesn't ignore God as their king, at least sometimes. But this Jesus seems to be the solution. In researching this pay dispute, I uncovered something else. This Jesus guy is planning to make his death our escape. He's planning to sacrifice himself for us, so that when the religious authorities hand him over to the Roman governor, and when the governor orders him to be executed on a cross, crucified, God will accept that sacrifice as payment of our death penalty for sin. So if we want justice over grace, then Jesus is saying that we want eternal death and punishment for our sin, instead of forgiveness and a pardon for our sin. We want to be punished instead of forgiven. Now, I think the thing we need to recognise here, and look, I'm not sure that even Jesus' followers clearly understood this, we can have both justice and grace for our sin. If Jesus' death is a just punishment for our sin, then God does give the death penalty for our sin to Jesus. And if God's forgiveness is a generous act of grace to us for our sin, then God's forgiveness is far better treatment than we deserve. Like how the 5 o'clock workers got paid a full day's pay. And so we can enter this kingdom of heaven through Jesus' death. We ask God to give us his grace and forgiveness and to transfer to Jesus the punishment that we deserve for our sin. And then once we're in the kingdom through God's generosity, the same generosity becomes our gold standard of how we treat people. We're quite willing to follow Jesus' example. We're quite willing to make sacrifices. We're quite willing to be the servant when needed. Well, that's my special report on the road to Jerusalem on the so-called pay dispute scandal, which has revealed an upside-down kingdom of heaven.